But you're recognizing that a machine could perform the operations that would satisfy a logical evaluator that would look at it and say, yes, that is true, and that this machine could exist in the physical world independent of any God.
No, I'm saying that it makes no sense to arbitrarily do special pleading, which is a fallacy, to say that I'm not going to accept a meta level question about what a law of logic is. I'm just going to use laws of logic in the world, and I don't want to deal with the question of whether they have any kind of independent existence. And I'm saying that I can prove that they have an independent existence by the fact of the absurdity of saying that they are part of an evolutionary process.
So that's a smokescreen. You are
No,
refusing to engage with the question of whether a machine can exist independent of your God, when in fact your argument relies on the very necessity of your God for these logical processes to be made. Do
can
you
a
agree?
machine exist independent of God, is your question?
Yep. A machine that would process 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 4 plus 4 equals 8.
I mean, it's a nonsense question because you're asking me to deny my worldview to say, could there be a machine that does these processes?
But
And I'm saying,
CJ, I'm
no,
just like you, and just like you don't care what I think earlier, you said, "Oh, I don't care what can come out of your brain. I care about the
no,
truth.
that's
I
not
don't
what I
care
meant.
about whether you can picture it or not." I'm asking you to be honest with yourself once in this debate and think about this machine. Does it exist or not? Can it exist or not?
Right. My point earlier was not to question your intellectual honesty in a moral sense. I was trying to point out what I saw as a contradiction. So I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'm simply saying that I don't think the question makes sense. If I believe that God exists, then it's impossible for me to conceive of a world where there's atheistic computers that just do math functions. Like there's the atheist Texas Instruments world where the I mean,
So
what
you've
is
just
the point of the question?
acknowledged that you cannot conceive of it and you don't want to conceive of it because you know very well that if a computer was out there out of the random arrangement of matter and was to perform calculations that if a human was to look at would judge are logical, it would prove that something can exist that processes logic without God. And you know that your argument
That's
relies
interesting
on
because
this
this is
machine
no,
not existing.
this is probably the most bizarre non-empirical atheist argument I've ever heard. So because I don't, I mean, you have no evidence or proof of this kind of thing or this kind of world where
No,
there's
but
a
because your argument does not rely on evidence, your argument of transcendentiality relies on the fact that it's impossible for machines to
you're
exist
you
that would.
you you're wrong about that not being an evidence. It is an evidence. It's a logical argument, just like Gödel's arguments are logical arguments.
That's
The
not what
form
I
it's a
said.
logical form.
That's not what I said. What I'm saying is your argument of transcendentiality requires that God is necessary
Right.
for people to exist in the state that they are, and you
And to
claim that
have
the state
cognition, right?
and you state that the state that they are, which justifies this necessity, is the fact that they can process logic. And you refuse right now to engage with the theoretical machine example because you know very well that the minute you answer yes to my question, your entire transcendental argument falls. Jay, can you picture a fictive machine that would process logic and give the right answers, even if it doesn't know anything about the laws of logic?
No, I mean, this is a laughable argument. I understand that you're trying to sort of turn the transcendental argument around, but I'm saying that it's a misunderstanding of what the transcendental argument is because just because you seem to think that throughout the debate, because we can conceive of something that in some way that means that it's possible or exists. And there are all kinds of things that we can conceive of that are not possible and don't exist. So I literally don't understand what the argument is trying to say. It's not I'm not trying to avoid something.
Okay. I'm trying to dismantle your assumption that because you observe people processing logic, then God exists. God necessarily exists. That's your argument. Let's
That's not
not
the
add
argument. The argument
what
is
is
not because I observe people processing logic. The argument is that
okay.
there are kinds of things about not just logic, but also mathematics and other transcendental categories that
Okay, I'm
cannot be
gonna undo
empirically
them one
verified.
by one. I'm gonna do them one by one, but we
Okay.
start with logic. You claim that logic is part of the set of things that justifies the existence of God as a
Sure.
necessity.
Right.
And now
Because
I'm asking you, can you picture a computer that has the right responses to logical processing, but that exists in a universe where there's no God?
no,
Why?
Because it's incoherent and contradictory.
What's incoherent and contradictory in the fact that
Number
these
one, there's no
atoms are
evidence for
arranged?
this thing. There's no evidence for this
You're
universe.
back to the evidence. I didn't ask if this computer actually existed. I asked in
So you want me
principle
to
if it can
theoretically
exist.
believe in things for which you have no evidence?
Absolutely.
How is
Because we are not talking about the real world. We're talking about your transcendental argument, which is a denial of that very possibility.
It applies to the real world.
The transcendental argument is a denial that it's even possible that there would be machines that would process logic, that logic could be performed by a machine or a computer. You admitted that earlier. You said, I admit that it is a necessary condition that God exists for any sort of logical operations to be made.
To be possible, not to be made, possible. To be possible.
Okay, so there can be machines.
That's what a precondition is.
So there can be machines that perform logical operations that are in line with the laws of logic.
Okay, the reason this doesn't work is because every reference that you have as an individual to machines or to logic or to anything like that you're using in this example, they come from this world. And they're necessarily conditioned by their existence in this world.
I'm using the word machine to communicate it to you, but can you picture atoms existing without any humans knowing about the term atom?
Can I picture atoms existing without humans knowing of the existence of atoms? Yeah. Okay, sure.
Okay, so I'm asking you to make the same thing about the machine. Forget that I'm calling it a machine. Forget that we have a concept of it. Can you agree that there are arrangements of matter that can output stuff that is logically true, while it isn't guided by God?
No.
So you're denying that a computer could exist in a physical universe without being guided by God.
Without there being a worldview in which it's possible to make computers and have logic and so forth. I mean, where's this computer coming from?
This computer could be arranged by a bunch of flesh processing.
I mean, isn't this interesting? This is what the atheist has to fall back on: is this most absurd, hypothetical, imagined worldview, and that's because really the whole position is absurd and imagined. I mean, I'm arguing a very specific thing about transcendentals in this world.
The machine I'm talking to you about are human beings. It's not an absurd world. The world I'm talking about
is a paradigm assumption that you think humans are merely biological machines.
Yep. Do you have evidence that I'm made of anything else than an atom, than a set of molecules?
This is ridiculous. You believe you wrote your book. So your book was the work of JF and JF's mind, right? It wasn't the process of a determined machine, right?
It was the process of a determined machine. It was the process of the neurons in my mind.
You didn't have, and you're not making your own arguments right now. They're just a chemical determined process.
Absolutely.
So you're not making arguments. Thank you. I've won the debate.
All right. Bye.
No, I'm saying that if you
serious?
That,
no, but I told you at the beginning, I'm just a monkey-like creature with a mouth and a brain, with a quantaloupe to eat it and other human beings to exchange with. I didn't claim anything else. And your problem is that you cannot debunk this version of
I just
my
debunked
life.
it.
You cannot prove that it's impossible.
I just debunked it by the fact that you come to the debate and you make arguments acting like they're from your mind and you freely do it. And you just said that you are a determined machine. That's self-contradictory.
Okay, this is a class. Andy, this is important. I'm not into low IQ interventions. Andy, so you shut up for 1 minute.
Okay, fine, man.
So
all right.
This is a classical argument of the form of Stéphane Molyneux, which is you engage in discussion, therefore you accept all the rules of discussion. I didn't. I don't. I'm just a human being. I emit noise. There are other beings. They interpret this noise based on their own rules. Andy, you can go ahead.
I was going to ask one question that was part of this.
I was kidding, Andy.
No, you pissed me off, dude.
I'm sorry, Andy. I was kidding.
Just because you're triggered, you can't.
I was not actually triggered. I love you, Andy.
Can I reply? So the argument is that is self-refuting and contradictory as a position. And no, my argument has nothing to do with Stéphane Molyneux. I don't follow Stéphane Molyneux, so I don't even know what his kind of.
So you don't know that it does have to do with it.
With Molyneux?
Yeah, it's the same form of argument. Molyneux proves moral realism using that strategy. He says, well, as soon as you engage in discussion, you want to share some things that are meaningful, therefore meaning exists, therefore blah, 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 and he moves on to moral realism. The fact that I engage in this discussion does not commit me to any structure in your mind. I don't care. I'm not bound by your rules and your interpretation of what this
No,
discussion
you're
is.
bound by objective rules of logic and
No,
debate. If you're not bound by objective rules of logic, then there's no debate. You guys want libertarian freedom in your socio-political sphere, and on the other hand, you're saying that you're a determined machine. So JF, your book is not your book. It's just a random process of determined chemicals. It's not.
all right.
You don't deserve any credit for that. And I'm saying
Let's
that
move.
listen, on my view, you do deserve credit for that because you have the ability to reason, you have a soul, you have a self, you have a will. There is freedom. This is sometimes called the naturalist fallacy or the determinist fallacy, and it's the idea that on the one hand, a lot of times the naturalist wants to have a kind of biologicized mechanistic view of the world, but they also want to have the other extreme irrational contradiction of total libertarian freedom. And these two views are totally incommensurable. They don't mix. And that's what I'm saying is a contradiction. You
Okay.
want both of those things. So your book
So
is
the fact that I engage on the public space as a libertarian would prove that I believe in morals, in objective morals.
no. It presupposes that you believe in metaphysical concepts like freedom, or that you are a self that deserves credit for your work.
No, I don't believe in metaphysical concepts like freedom. When I argue on the public space, I use words freedom. I descend from monkeys who didn't want to have other monkeys control their testicles. And in human societies, we've evolved to develop language. We're able to understand concepts that other people are talking about. We're able to agree on a common concept. The concept of freedom is not a universal concept. It is simply the fact that we consider that our actions in the world can be interfered by others or not. There's no statement that.
I don't think that's coherent. That's my argument. I understand what you're saying.
Well, let me complete my argument because I want to show you how this is not incoherent.
Okay.
So there are other machines around me that could stop my arm movement as I make an arm movement. When I say I am for freedom, I'm not saying everyone should be for freedom. I'm not saying it's a desirable state for every possible creature and it's an objective truth. All I'm saying is I'm trying to convince the monkeys around me not to block my arm movements because I know that they have interests, genetic interests that are different from mine. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, it's understandable that I've evolved to send that kind of signals. I'm just telling to the other, don't invade on my liberties because I want to reproduce. If I didn't do that, what probably happened is that there were people not discussing stuff in human societies, not able to interact through language or not able to tell others to shut up when it's time to shut up. These people were outbreeded. And so today what we have is people who care about what others will do and who care to protect themselves from the actions of others. There's no inconsistency in what I've just stated.
Of course there is. I don't want there to be anything metaphysical. And this is why in the history of Western thought, in the history of Enlightenment thought, and then into the atheistic philosophers and so forth, Hume and Kant, the reason that they started going away from metaphysics is because they're problematic. It's difficult to talk about rights, to talk about the notion of freedom, and on the one hand say, I don't want anything metaphysically related to that, but I also want this to be something that I really possess. I don't want to have any metaphysical conception of what a self is or what my mind is and its work and its products, and that I should receive the money for the book that I write. But at the same time, I also hold on my worldview that I don't believe in any metaphysical principles or truths, no absolutes, no universals, and maybe freedom is not for everybody else, but I'm also just a biological machine. So in other words, just because you want to say, I don't care about anybody else's universal relations to these principles, I just want these for myself. Again, it's just like earlier in the debate about epistemology. When you study logic and epistemology, it's not about what you want or don't want or accept or don't accept, because these are principles that are objective. And you said, I don't accept the logical rules and principles that you bring to the debate. I mean, if that's the case, then there is no debate.